Hey designer, Alex here, welcome to the channel, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to create this 3D room in Blender, and then how to export it from Blender and take it into Adobe Dimension for some further tweaking if you want to. Finally, I'm going to show you how to import that render from Dimension into Adobe Photoshop, where you can tweak some settings even further and adjust some lighting and some shadows. And finally, when you can take that image, that PNG or PSD, bring it into Adobe Xd using libraries, and finally create something like this. There is a practice file in the description below for this 3D model and for this final file for Adobe Xd. Make sure to check them all out, and without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so before we get started, make sure to download the practice files. I'm going to provide the Blender practice file as well as Adobe Xd practice file in order for you to follow along this video. You don't need to learn how to use Blender, but I'm going to share a video tutorial with you guys from 3D Greenhorn, who is actually the one who is creating a room like this, and it's actually the video where I learned to create a room like this. I'm by no means the Blender expert, I'm just learning the same as a bunch of you guys out there, I presume. So if you want to create exactly the same room or to create any sort of different room, you can then follow along that tutorial. Blender is completely free to use. That tutorial is on YouTube, so I will post the links down in the description below for both of them, and also I will provide the practice file for you guys to follow along this Adobe Xd tutorial at the end. So now let's jump inside Blender and let me show you how I structured this file and what you can learn from it. So here we are in Blender, and don't be too scared because you don't know how to work with this and you don't know how what any of this means. You don't actually need to, so let me actually switch myself over here so I can show you some quick settings and what you can do in Blender. So if I hit 0 on my keyboard, it will jump outside of camera mode and it's going to allow us to spin around this room. You can see I have some messy geometry right here, but as I said, I'm just a beginner. I'm learning this stuff and I'm giving this away to you guys if you want to have exactly the same results as I do. Just make sure to pay attention. Then Blender is really computer heavy, so if you don't have a strong machine, then make sure to avoid this part and just use a PNG image which I provided in Adobe Xd file if you don't want to have any sort of issues. But basically what this means for you is you can open it up if you want to, and you can rotate here if you want to. You can go ahead and change any of these parts, feel free to do so, but if you don't, you can simply skip this Blender part and open up the next part which I'm going to show you. But here we are in the basically viewport shading and material mode. If I switch right here, we have materials mode. So these are all the colors which I used, these are all the shades which I used, and all these squares and boxes that you see around are actually lights, and we have 4 different lights. We have this one at the top, we have this one at the back, this rectangle, we have this one and this one, which are sort of lights from the side, and finally this huge massive thing right here is actually the camera. So if I hit 0 on my keyboard, it's going to snap into that camera mode. And finally, if I switch right here, things are going to start to get a bit jittery when I start switching around, but basically this is our render preview mode, and this is how our design is actually going to look like at the end when we actually export it. But before we export, what I can share with you is this. So this is the output properties, and here I set it on Y to be 1920, which is ideal for Instagram story if you want to share this design to Instagram stories. But if I hit 1080, press enter, it's going to create a square. So I will have to zoom in right here because you can see that the background is actually sticking outside of these bounds. But if I don't want to, I can simply go 1920 right here, which is actually the resolution which I am going to keep. What's important here is to select RGBA, which is RGB plus alpha, and the alpha is actually transparent mode, which you are going to need if you want to import this into Adobe Xd later. For example, RGB is just red, green and blue. It's going to keep all of the color information but without any transparency. That's where the alpha comes in. And make sure to select PNG from this drop down. You can see all of these different file formats right here, but just make sure to select PNG because that's going going to keep that transparency. And one final thing which I want to share right here is if you come right here to the render properties, if you render this out as Eevee, which is default Blender render engine, it's going to have great quality but not top quality. So what you would want to do is to switch this Eevee to cycles, and it's going to be really computer intensive. If you don't have a strong machine, then I would recommend for you to keep it at Eevee or simply skip this part as I mentioned. And finally scroll right here where it says film and make sure to check this transparent box. That's going to allow for us to have all of these transparent shadows in the background underneath our object, underneath our room. And one final thing that you want to do before you actually export this is click right here where it says BG for background, hide this and hide this, because this is going to hide it from view and this is going to hide it from render. Then if I hit F12 on my keyboard, it's going to start rendering and you can see your final result and how it looks like right here. Now pay attention, this is actually Eevee, and cycles is going to be a bit different, and you can see some weird things happening with this XD logo right here because I hidden some elements inside. So if I bring it back really quickly and locate my other one, which is this one, XD logo, I will have to play around with this in order to achieve that result. But basically that's it. That's how this looks like, and that's how you can export it as quick PNG. One last thing to note, you can actually click right here where it says render image, and let me show you this. What you can do where it says image, you can hit that and then you can hit save and save this out as PNG if you want to. And finally make sure to hide the actual background before you save it out. One final note, you will note that here we have this picture frame. You can use this picture frame to import any kind of image that you want, but I'm actually going to save that for Dimension, where we are going to go next, because I want to show you how awesome Dimension is when you combine this 3D that you created in Blender, taking it into Dimension, and then you can also take it into Adobe Photoshop. But before we go into Dimension, we have to save out this project file. So what you can do is come right here where it says file, and then you can go to export and export as OBJ, waveform OBJ. Click that, make sure to select your destination, hit export OBJ, and that's basically all you need to get started in Dimension. Let's now switch to Dimension and open up this model. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Dimension, and what you can do is come right here where it says open, select your OBJ file, hit open, and what that's going to do is it's going to open that file which we exported from Blender, and it's going to take it into Adobe Dimension, and it's going to keep all of these settings inside, and it's going to show you this model once it loads up. And because this is Adobe's software, Adobe's tool, you're going to be really familiar if you already know how to use Adobe Xd, if you know how to use Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever. Just make sure to pay attention that this is even more computer heavy. You can see how long it takes it to load than Blender, for example. So here is our model. Here is how it looks like inside of Adobe Dimension, and what you can do is use some of these navigational tools right here, and let me switch myself right here to this place. So what you can do is move camera up, down, left or right, or you can use space and right click. So if I use space and right click, you can see how that looks like. I can use scroll wheel on my mouse, and then I can simply zoom in nice and close. What I can do right here is I need to pivot a little bit, so I can use orbit tool or simply use right click, and it's going to basically bring me right here to the top. You can choose whichever kind of setting that you want, and you can export it that way. And finally you can switch between these different modes. You can go to the top view, for example, just to switch up this view from here. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you how to put an image right here. And speaking about images, I can go ahead and select this, double click inside to select this picture frame. You can see it right here, and here we have these different actions. Let me hide myself so you can see a bit better. What you can do is you can bring link to material, and I can click that, and it's going to break away from this blue material and this white material. And what I can also do is place graphic on model, so I can click right there and locate an image that I want to use, which is this image, which is basically an image from one of my previous tutorials. If I zoom in a little bit closer, you can see it, and you can check out that tutorial on my channel. It was actually a nice live stream. So I can click right here to increase it in height, and I can click right here to increase it in width and basically position it nice and close, something like this. I can also click right here to rotate it if needed, and you can see because of the lighting setup we have some nice shadows bouncing right here against our frame. So that's how super easy it is to use Dimension, and as I said, it's super computer intensive, especially in my case, but basically what you can do here is you have all of these awesome models which you can place on your scene. And because we have this room scene, maybe what we can do is set up some models. So what we can do maybe is putting some nice side table, put it somewhere around here. And because it's huge, let's scale it up. So side table, and what I can do right here, let me hide myself, is I can hit scale. And I can come right here and make sure that it's scaled, let's see, 0.01. Let's try that, or 0.1. Okay. And what I can do is zoom in nice and close, and I can scale it on the y-axis. I can zoom in all the way, and I can position it because this is 3D. Of course, it's going to go into 3 different axes, X, Y, and Z. There we go. And I can scale it all the way down to here, and I can even nudge it and position it, let's say, instead of this one. And what's also awesome about it is I can switch it over to materials panel, which is this one right here, and I can apply some different materials. So let's go with walnut wood, let's say. There we go. And if I zoom in nice and close, you can see that it's now applied that walnut wood texture to it if I want to. Of course, what's great about this is you can set up your own shadows, you can apply your own settings, you can do whatever you want. And finally, we have this orbit tool, or as I said, right click, and you can check it out in these different perspectives. You can see how it looks like. And once again, apologies for these terrible topology mistakes, but this is a free model and you can experiment and do with it whatever you want. And of course, because as I said, I'm going to provide that free tutorial to you guys from YouTube, you can create this room yourself. Now finally, what's left for us to do is to actually go ahead and export this, and to do that you can come right here where it says render, and what you can do is give it a name. So let's say cute room, something like this. And what you can do is use quality. So high is going to of course be slow, medium, and low is going to be fast, medium is going to be medium. So I can export it wherever I want, and I can use PSD and PNG because I want to export it in both formats. Once again, remember, PNG is going to keep that transparency, and PSD is going to allow me to actually manipulate this file a bit more. So let's go ahead and do that. But before we do, actually, I wanted to show you a camera. So let's say that I like this camera angle, maybe something like that, and I can also use some other settings. So let's see, maybe I can switch it around nice and slow, something like that, and I can make sure that this is scaled. There we go. We have this BG plane 3, so you can scale it, you can adjust this background if you want to, but let's actually export it something like this. So let's position it roughly around here, make sure it's flipped because I want to show you some tips later in Photoshop how you can actually further manipulate this and export it. And of course, because we don't have any lights right here, it would be amazing to include some lights, or you can use environmental lights. So let's use, let's see, I don't know, studio light. Architecture is going to start loading. It's a bit dark, maybe this one will help. There we go. You can see how much of a difference that makes. Maybe this one is more. Let's go with this Mallorca road. Let it load a bit. This forest, it's all quite dark. Let's go with sun, and you can change the intensity right here. So if I crank up the intensity all the way up, and let's choose different rotation. So perhaps I want to rotate it to roughly around here, and height. So you can play around with it like it is a real sun, cloudiness or no. And finally, you can quickly change the color. So let's go with, I don't know, this color. You can see how that looks like. You can play around with temperature. So let's go with this temperature. I think that's good. And finally, now that we have all of this ready, I don't want to bother you with too many of these lights and confuse you even more. If you want, you can check out different tutorials explaining all about Dimension and 3D. And as I said, make sure to check out that Blender tutorial, which goes even deeper into explaining all about these different settings. So once we are ready, we can come right here where it says render, and I'm going to hit render. Now, once again, depending on your machine, it's going to take longer or shorter. In my case, it's going to take something like 5 or 10 minutes or something like that. So I'll see you in a bit once this is rendered. Alright, now that the render has been completed, you can see right here that it took 7 minutes and 15 seconds, and that's what I've been saying. It does take quite a while, especially if you have a bit slower machine. Usually it doesn't take me that long, but because I'm running all of this recording gear to record these videos for you guys, that's why it does take a bit longer. But anyways, this is Dimension done. And what I forgot to mention a while ago is, because this is Adobe software, same like all the other Adobe software, you have the choice of libraries. That's quite awesome feature to have, because for example, you can open up Adobe Illustrator, and in it you can create, let's say, some kind of a texture or a template or a background pattern. Then you can open it up here in Dimension and apply that same pattern to walls, for example. So you can have all of those wallpapers, and to the carpet, for example, to the table, to the cushions. You can do whatever you want, and you can really expand upon the functionalities of Adobe Creative Cloud. But now let's move on to Photoshop, because if you remember, we exported it as PSD, and now if I switch to Photoshop, here we have that same file, and here is how it looks like. So if I check this, you can see that we have a material selection mask right here, we have object selection mask, we have depth information, because this is a 3D file after all. So I can hide this and uncheck that if I want to. Here we have rendered image and how it looks like, and here we have this one with reduced noise. So if I hit F a few times, just to show you how this looks like, because we didn't set up any camera, you can see that there is high quality up until now, but once I start zooming in, the quality is lost. So you can go ahead and set all of that up in Dimension if you want to have any kind of additional settings to it, and if you want to add any kind of additional quality to your final file. But what I wanted to show you is this. You can hit W on your keyboard, and you can simply expand upon this selection, and you can go ahead and select this gray bit if you want to, and even go as far as to select these shadows. And then you can hold Alt to deselect any kind of part that you selected by accident, for example. And then using non-destructive methods, you can go ahead and select mask, or even better, hit select, inverse or shift control I, and then hit mask, which is going to mask this room. And this is what you actually want. You can delete the background color and go ahead and mask all of these parts. So let me go Control Z, let me hit B on my keyboard, and let me mask away all of these parts from my image. Of course, if you set it up like that in Dimension without any background, it's going to come inside of Photoshop without any background. What's great about this is you can go ahead and, let's say, select, or let's go to image adjustments, and let's set up levels, for example. And it's going to bring me this levels curve, which you can see it's quite dark because I didn't set up any lights. And great thing about Photoshop is I can go ahead and adjust it right here. So there we go. This is how super quick and super simple this is. Of course, there are some rough edges here and there. So if I hit X on my keyboard to bring additional painting tools, so let's click right here, then hit B, then hit X, and start painting right in. I can paint in all of my shadows if I want to keep those shadows, and then maybe I can choose a rougher brush for this. So if I select this one, for example, hit X one more time, and then I can come right here, or even better, I can use a pen tool to be super precise with this. Something like this, let's say, just for this demonstration purposes. And then you can hit B one more time to select your brush tool. You can select this one, you can change the opacity, for example, right here, and then you can paint in this shadow to make it not so visible. And then you can come to the edges to feather them out even more. depending on the effect that you want to achieve. I'm making my life a bit difficult here because you can do all of this in Dimension, but the whole point here is to show you that you can achieve that same result in Photoshop as well. And Photoshop being Photoshop gives you all of these additional settings. And what I want to do lastly is hit C on my keyboard for the crop tool and crop it roughly around here. Then here, because I went to all that trouble to create that shadow, let's actually keep the shadow up until here, press enter, there we go. And if I switch to libraries, what I can do is save this image and save this file to libraries. So I can simply drag it right here and it's going to save it, or I can right click and let's say I have to actually merge it. So let's go ahead and delete all of these additional layers, hit Ctrl E or right click. And blending options, I can mask all objects or convert to smart object, which is perhaps the best option. And I can then go ahead and import it to my Creative Cloud libraries, and I can save it like that. So if I select it from here, you can see I already have some previous images here, and there is a plus, so I can click Add Elements, and let's use Graphic. And it's going to add that graphic to my Creative Cloud libraries. So now that that's completed, let me actually take you to XD, where I can show you how to add this graphic if you want to, or the original graphic from Blender, which I'm actually going to end up using for this Adobe Xd tutorial. But make sure to check out that tutorial which I told you about on YouTube if you want to create this exact room in Blender. So let's hop into Adobe Xd and let me show you that. And finally, here we are in Adobe Xd with a finished result, and I'm going to walk you through how I created this. It's super simple to do. And I didn't want to waste too much of your time because you're going to get this practice file so you can check it out how I created it, but it's super simple. And let's quickly preview the final file and the final result. So this is how it looks like. This is the original image, as you can see, without any image on the wall. This is the text right here. I have a small button and I have this logo and just a quick menu on top. So as I said, I'm not going to waste too much of your time, but I'm just going to explain to you how I created this. So if I select it, you can see the folder structure. So we have the navigation, we have the logo right here. And if I switch our layout a little bit, we are using 12 column layout, and here we have 60 for the gutter width, so 60 for the distance between all of these columns. And if you watch my videos regularly, you know that's the setting I like to use. So if I switch my layout off, just to show you the rest of the structure, here we have nav items, and because we have that 60, I increased it to 64, but you can use 60 if you want to for the stack for all of these files. Then we have this text, and for it I used 48 down for the stack. Inside we just have two texts, and we have this button with a button background. Here we have our star image, and finally here we have our grid. So I used repeat grid, and I used it 2 times for this design, one to go across and one to go from top to bottom, and I just merged them into one group. And I used 3D transform, which is this option right here. And if I show you how that looks like, so you can select the grid, turn on the 3D transform, and if I select it and rotate it a bit, you can see how it looks like. I just tried to match the overall angle of this room, and as I said, you can see that I end up using the original render from my room. But if you want, you can use the render which we created, which I'm also going to provide. So when I go right here to the document assets, this is going to be in your file when you download and try to use this. So instead of document assets, let's go to your library, and here is that one. So if I drag and drop it inside, this is the one which we created. So if I switch off the 3D transform, if I hit Shift, Alt and left click, so you can use whichever one you want and you think it fits best. You can see that it needs a bit of cleaning right here in Photoshop, which I didn't do. That's all because as I exported it from Dimension, I didn't clean up these edges and I kept the background in, which was my mistake. But if you want, you can export that as well. So how this looks like without this one, you can simply hide it, and there we go. So if I hit Control Enter, it's not the best look in my opinion, but you can still use this one if you want to. But because of the smaller resolution, I would really try to avoid this one. But at the end it's really all up to you which one you want to use and how you want to approach this. And for the best possible results, I will leave that tutorial which I mentioned from 3D Greenhorn down in the description below, so you can check it out and see if you can create something like this in Blender yourself. It's super simple to do, it's super simple to create. It took me like 1 hour to create a room like this, and I just showed you in this video how you can expand XD using all of these Creative Cloud apps to build upon that functionality and not just use XD but use all of these other Creative Cloud apps. So there we go, that's our video for today. I really hope you enjoyed it, and sorry about rough patches here and there. I'm still learning 3D, so I just try to pass that knowledge which I'm getting from these tutorials and these courses which I'm purchasing down to you guys, so you can check what's possible and then you can hopefully expand upon the skills which you already have. Make sure to check out the practice files. I will leave the original Blender file which I created, and sorry for the topology, it's not all that great, but I will also leave this XD file if you want to check it out as well, this final result which I just showed you. And finally, I'm going to link down to the original video where I took the inspiration from and where I created and followed the instructions to create this room. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you did, make sure to press that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel. I upload new videos every single week right here on the channel, all about Adobe Xd, passive income techniques and so much more. So if you're interested, make sure to subscribe, and until next time, take care.